It's gonna be okay. I'll read my essay quick, nail the competition, bow, thank you very much, and run you right home.
So after reviewing Pepper Ann and discussing how underrated of a gem that series is, I figured at some point I might as well talk about another Disney animated series that I grew up with and remember enjoying. Which to choose from though? I can talk about Gravity Falls, Darkwing Duck, or House of Mouse, sure, but I figured there's another show out there from Disney Animation that is kind of overlooked and not talked about that much. And fortunately, there was one that definitely came to mind. So one day I said,
I'll take a chance
and make a video on one of Disney's other hidden gems, Teacher's Pet. Because who else is going to make a video on Teacher's Pet?
I wanna be a boy.
Man, you want to talk about a show that people seem to remember, but almost never talk about? It's this series about a dog wanting to be a boy. Yet, despite its relative obscurity and people never talking about it, it does have a decent place in the Disney lineup. So much so that it became one of the first shows to be put on Disney Plus, which is surprising. However, that ended up being a pretty good thing, as watching this series again after so long, it turns out that Teacher's Pet is another show that deserves at least some credit for being a very clever and fun animated series from Disney. What holds up about Teacher's Pet? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Teacher's Pet, and how it's an overlooked gem in terms of Disney animation. So, how did Teacher's Pet came to be? What made Disney decide to make a show like Teacher's Pet? Well, the best way to start is by talking about who created the show, as a number of different people worked on it, including animation director Tim Borklund, who directed the majority of the episodes, screenwriting duo Cherry and Bill Steinkeller, who wrote most of the episodes. But the main creative force behind the idea of this show is artist Gary Baseman, a cartoonist who's known for his very distinct art style with strange looking characters and designs all around. You probably have seen his art in some capacity, as besides this show, he's best known for his work on the board game Cranium, with his unique designs plastered all over it. His art is known for being more persuasive, as he tends to focus on his art being less lowbrow. He wants to have his art not only be seen, but also stuff you can learn about in enlightening ways. Something that I find very commendable, and is a good fit for this series as a whole, and how it differs from other cartoons at that time. He based this idea off of his own dog, and decided to make a show about how this dog ends up going to school. So why does this character do this? Well, I say it's time we talk about the premise of this show, which explains that very well in the original pilot. The series focuses on a young boy named Leonard Helperman, and his dog Spot. And like with most series, the first episode starts with Leonard about to have his first day of the new school year. However, when Leonard leaves for school, we find out that Spot isn't your normal everyday dog, as Spot clamors for the experience of going to school to learn more about the world, as he's not satisfied with his life as a dog, being often bored by it.
To walk down the hallowed halls of learning in brand new sneakers that have yet to see the light of day.
Within the first episode, Spot gets this rather crazy idea that what if he goes to school and disguises himself as a kid. You might question how no one notices this weird looking non-human character clearly disguised as a kid, but considering that this is a cartoon with some very distinct character designs, I'll let it slide. Once he arrives at school, he ends up using a new persona as his identity as Scott, albeit by accident.
Spot?
Did you say Scott?
Yeah, that's a good boy's name.
Uh-huh. And what's your last name, Scott?
Last name?
Yeah, what's the last name, Scott? Are you a Lang, a Terraman, a Waz, a Pilgrim?
Lead Ready, number 2.
Oh, the second.
Yeah.
So yeah, he goes by the identity of Scott Ledready II and becomes the newest student at this school. and impresses the students with his knowledge. Though Leonard eventually finds out that this new student is actually his dog, and it adds for more conflict within the series between the two. But as the series goes on, you see more of the bond these two have with one another, despite what differences and conflicts that have arisen, all while trying to keep Scott's secret identity under wraps. A fine and dandy premise for a show like this, but as with most shows Disney made during this time, it's another show that isn't like your typical Disney show, and aims to be more like the Disney version of something Nickelodeon would do. So if Recess was essentially Disney's Rugrats, and Pepper Ann in many ways was Disney's Doug, well, outside of Doug, then I say Teacher's Pet was probably the show that Disney made as their own version of SpongeBob. I say this because both shows aim to be very cartoonish and comedic in similar ways. The way SpongeBob and Teacher's Pet are usually emphasized by their own art direction, which I gotta say, that is something that stands out big time from this show for me. The art direction is very familiar, as it's trying to emulate the kind of oddly grotesque at point, yet also very cartoonish and over-the-top style in the vein of SpongeBob, Ren and Stimpy, among other shows of this caliber. There's a lot of big expressions and a ton of comedic timing just based on the animation, which is really unique for Disney standards. Though, this also has a lot more fluidity when it comes to its animation. Characters move very smooth, arguably more so than other shows at that time, though it still isn't afraid to have a lot of energy, and I think the animation does add to this. Hell, even the music at points is very much in line with those comedic shows, as it uses a lot of stock music that you would hear in many of the other SpongeBob type shows.
Just give me a sec, it's been a few years, so here I go.
I love how the show looks, but it isn't just style over substance, as Teacher's Pet does stand out to me for having a pretty standout cast. I think now it's time to discuss what makes these characters pretty fun for a show like this.
Teacher's pet, I wanna be teacher's pet. I wanna be huddled and cuddled as close to you as I can get.
If we have to start out with any character of this series, it is most definitely Scott Ledready / Spot Helperman. And he's a good place to start because if there's anyone who makes this show for me, it's most definitely him. There are two things that really make this character stand out. The first being the voice acting. If Spot's voice sounds familiar to you, and if you haven't figured it out by now, he is voiced by Nathan Lane. If you're unfamiliar with his work, he's a famous actor known for his work in numerous movies and Broadway shows.
Up until now, I thought Monsters Incorporated was a documentary on the Weinsteins. But...
However, most Disney aficionados will know him much better for his most iconic role, being none other than...
Wow!
That's right, Timon from The Lion King. So I guess his work from that movie was good enough that Disney wanted to capitalize on his talent by giving him his own show. Though I'm not complaining, cause watching this show again made me realize how much I really love this guy as an actor. Lane tends to give it his all in most of the roles he's been in, coming from a very theatrical background. He's very outspoken, but shows a lot of confidence with how much energy and passion he gives to these roles, and that definitely applies here as well. It's a shame we haven't seen much of Nathan Lane lately because he's a very likable personality.
This just goes to prove the old show business adage, everyone is replaceable except James Earl Jones. Hakuna Matata.
But I have a strong feeling that 2023 will be his comeback year. I mean, did you hear that he's going to be in the next A24 movie with Joaquin Phoenix, directed by Midsommar director Ari Aster?
feeling sad about going home, Bo?
Yeah, that's coming out later this year, and I'm predicting this will bring in a new renaissance for Nathan Lane's career. Anyway, back to Teacher's Pet. He's pretty great in this show, except for the episodes where they couldn't get Lane and he's voiced by Kevin Scorn.
Mother of invention, thy name is Leonard.
Though, he also does a decent job imitating Lane's performance, even if it's a little inconsistent on where he appears as Scott on the show. One of the episodes being the actual final episodes of this series, which is kinda odd. The other major thing about Spot outside of Lane's performance is actually the kind of character Scott really is when it comes to major central protagonists of cartoon shows. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let's take a look at what kind of characters in cartoons that were popular during that time. You might not remember, or maybe not even been around during the mid-2000s, but in terms of cartoons, one of the biggest trends of the time was
TV.
Stupidity is funny. The 2000s were a big age of cartoons where the main way to get a laugh was to act dumb. So you got a lot of characters whose main appeal was that they're the stupid one, or they're funny because they say or do stupid things, and it's funny because it's all lol, random humor of that time. Even characters whose traits weren't solely that ended up either doing that kind of lol random humor at some point, or just progressively got dumber as the series went on, since that's what was funny at the time. This isn't to say that all of these quote-unquote dumb characters are bad. In fact, most of the ones I mentioned here are still characters I like, relatively speaking. However, it can feel rather repetitive to see a bunch of different characters who are stupid in some capacity, which in retrospect makes Scott Ledreddy a much more distinct character of that time period. Scott is far from a dumb character. In fact, Scott indulges in the very idea of learning, as it's his whole reason to why he's going to school in the first place. He always has an admiration for learning about so many different things, and to his credit, he's a very bright character in the intelligence department. He does take time to effectively learn about his peers and surroundings to be a better person, which makes me really like this character.
I ask you, what kind of world has this become, where appearances are more important than who we really are? Wow, I just got pretty passionate there. And darn persuasive, if I do say so myself.
Not to mention, in terms of vocabulary, Scott has quite a way with words, as I can't think of any other character who's this descriptive, saying huge words constantly.
To quote postmodern existential philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, we are our decision.
It helps you get a sense of how passionate of a student Scott is, and also adds a bit of humor when he has to battle his dog-like instincts with his more intelligent side. So overall, Scott, I say, makes this show big time for me for how much smarter he is than the average cartoon character of the 2000s. Of course, we don't just have Scott, but a plethora of other different characters, and probably the second major lead of the show, Leonard Helperman, Spot's owner. At first, I got a little bit annoyed with Leonard as a character because his whole thing is that he wants to be seen as a normal kid. The problem is,
What if ever after I'm just known as the kid with the talking dog?
oh, I have a talking dog. That's not normal at all. Why can't I have a regular old dog? Bro, you have a talking dog. What child your age would see their own dog talking and doing all these amazing things and not think that it's the coolest shit ever? It's just like Charlie Brown, where you guys are literally complaining about having what every child dreams about. Just grow up.
Why can't I have an ordinary dog like everybody else?
Though I have to give Leonard some slack, because yes, it does seem odd that he's so against his dog being extraordinary, all because he wants to be seen as normal. However, when really watching the show, you kind of realize that, yeah, Leonard is your average everyday kid who no one understands. So his own dog Spot being actually smarter than he is does cause a bit of a conflict as the show goes on. You see that Leonard is actually jealous of Spot because he is an overachiever and excels at school way harder than Leonard has. While they ultimately stay as friends and get along, the show does a good job showcasing this conflict very well. It's more early on, but you get why Leonard feels this way about Spot now. So can't really blame him too much, since I think if your dog started to go to school and becomes a better student than you, you'd be envious too. Plus, one thing I can't blame Leonard for being embarrassed about is having his overly affectionate mother be his teacher.
Oh, I am so proud of my little widow candidate. Oh.
Mrs. Helperman serves as not only Leonard's mom, but also teacher for both him and Scott. She's the quirky, kinda ditzy character who has her own cutesy way with words. There's not really a lot to say about her, but she can honestly be a pleasant character to see play off the others.
Say, wouldn't it be fascinating if somehow a dog could transform himself into a little boy? Well, I am not going to give away my best ideas for science fiction short stories.
Oh, and if you're wondering if that voice sounds familiar, it's the same actress of the mom of that 70s show. There are also two major characters I want to discuss that serve as part of the main focus, and those are the other pets of the Helperman family, Pretty Boy and Mr. Jolly. Pretty Boy is the pet bird of the household. He's known for his majestic voice. Outside of that, he's a pretty loudmouth and angry bird, no pun intended, that usually doesn't put up with any BS.
Excuse me, but are you going to tell me what this Ruti Shubuti means?
Or are you just gonna keep torturing me here?
He's one of those small yet thinks he's better than he is sort of character, and he's portrayed quite well by Ben Stiller's late dad, Jerry Stiller. He does a good job really delivering his aggressive attitude, and Jerry Stiller would even reunite with Nathan Lane later on as the role of Uncle Max in Lion King 1.5. So, safe to say that both of these actors work off each other quite well. Mr. Jolly is the exact opposite of Pretty Boy. He's a very lazy and timid cat who just wants to chill and not really do much else.
We've always had television. Except for that one day the power was out and we slept for 18 hours straight. You want to sleep?
He has his own little quirks and preferences throughout the series, and he's also another fairly funny character, voiced pretty well by another major Disney veteran, David Ogden Stiers. Both of these characters would usually be the main ones to have a subplot in each episode. Sometimes it deals with them actually contributing to Scott's and Leonard's adventures. Other times it would just be them working on whatever random mundane conflict they are dealing with at home. Actually, later on in the series, we saw more of them, weirdly enough, spending most of their time on the internet reacting to things. I guess you could say these were the prime YouTube reactionaries on the internet, especially during the time where the internet was still a relatively new thing. They're neat characters that I do like seeing around in this show, with the banter and funny moments they have, even if I do ultimately prefer seeing whatever shenanigans Scott has for his day at school. Which, if we're going to be talking about the schoolmates of this show, I guess that leads to one of the small issues I have with this series. The series does have a gang of side characters that I'll be the first to admit they don't stand out to me that much. I mean, they're not bad by any means, but they do serve as sort of your typical archetypes of classmates. You got the cool kids, you got the gossipy girls, and most of them are just kinda there for the most part. I think partially because we didn't really get an episode where it just focuses on one of them, like a lot of other cartoons with this kind of cast. I mean, Leonard wants to be seen as cool like the other cool kids, and one of the girls ends up having a crush on Leonard, but none of these characters really make that big of an impact on the plot or get fleshed out that much outside of the role they have in an episode. They're not bad. I still like their designs, and even some of them have their own funny moments, though really, there's only two major classmates that do end up getting some attention in this series. One of them being Leonard's own crush, Leslie Dunkling. Just from that description, she serves as the standard sort of elementary/middle school love interest that the main character is obsessed with. A lot of episodes deal with Leonard trying not to die of embarrassment around her, though at least she does have an understanding and nice personality that makes her not a bad addition to the show, and it can be nice to see her share some of the same interests and insecurities Leonard often has. The other classmate that gets more of a focus on is Ian Wazalewski, and he serves as the show's main gross-out character.
Did you hear? Leonard's roommate's with a cop!
Clean your ears, Ian.
Hey, wow! $50. My It's a bank!
Ian is a slob who's often very dirty and would do gross things that the other kids wouldn't do. He's there partially because gross out humor was a big thing in the 2000s, so fitting that a character like this is on this show. And he also serves as contrast to Scott. Ian tends to be a student that acts more like a dog than the actual dog pretending to be a kid on this show. So there's some fun irony there.
What's your problem?
Though Ian, I feel, works as a character since they don't overuse him. They do make him have some humorous moments, and goes without saying that Rob Paulsen does a very good job giving this character that odd, quirky grossness that these shows were known for. I guess the last character we should talk about is probably the closest thing this series has to a main antagonist, and that being Principal Strickler. With a name like Strickler, you can already take a guess of what kind of principal this guy would be. And you'd be right. Principal Strickler is the strict authoritarian principal of the school, who definitely pulls no punches on whoever might be suspicious in his eyes. His main character trait, though, is that he hates dogs. And how could someone hate something as beloved as a dog?
There's some irresponsible child violated school policy and brought a cute new puppy in for show and tell. And do you know what happened? It bit off half my thumb!
Jeez, man. I mean, yeah, that sucks, but like, no need to want a mass genocide of man's best friend because of that. So this little fact does add some tension to the show, as Scott has to be extra careful about his dog identity being revealed to a canine-hating principal. He's not so much maliciously evil, as he's just a harsh principal who plays by the rules and gets very aggressive at points. Though Strickler does have his moments of understanding and being cool with the other students in a way that isn't as trendy. So he does have his likable moments, but even when he is pissed, sometimes that can be pretty funny too. And I also think that's due in part with the voice acting. Yes, that is Wally Shawn in this role, who once again does a good job portraying a character incredibly prone to anger in the most comedic way he can pull it off.
I'm not happy, Bob. Not happy.
The funny thing is that this isn't even his first time playing as a principal for Disney. As you all know, he was also the principal in a Goofy movie, who, ironically enough, was a dog. So it makes me wonder, would Principal Strickler actually get along with his alternate self in the universe where everyone's a dog? Or would he let his canine prejudice get the best of him? It'd be an interesting character interaction. Though, which principal is more cruel and unusual when it comes to handling the school? You decide.
Seriously, reevaluate the way you're raising your child before he ends up in the electric chair!
So all around, you do have a pretty neat cast of characters in this show. And while I wouldn't say all of them are that strong, the minor characters don't really hold a candle to the side characters of shows like The Simpsons, or even Pepper Ann for that matter. The main leads, especially Scott/Spot, do make this show a fun time for sure. Though let's not forget the kind of episodes and story this series is known for. So I think we should move on to that.
And if you wanna be a teacher's man, well, baby, you just have to get it.
Teacher's Pet, much like your typical cartoon of the time, follows a bit of a formula. Most episodes tend to focus on an aspect of school life Spot might have to adjust to being a dog trying to become human. Some of these include learning about dealing with getting in trouble for poor behavior, how to deal with a young crush, dealing with a school bully, or even in some cases, more weirdly dog-related scenarios that might reveal his status. Like, one of my favorite episodes dealing with this is when there's a bring your parent to school day where the parents show off what profession they work. Just so happens one of the kids brings a kind of person Spot doesn't like because he's a dog. No, not a police officer, not a fireman, not even a dog catcher. What kind of person would a dog hate?
It's obvious, he's a mailman. A mailman!
Oh no. Yeah, according to dogs, mailmen are the arch nemesis of their society for intruding on their owner's property. And this leads Scott to rat his ass out.
What few people realize is that all letter carriers are evil, scheming thieves.
Of course, by the end of the episode, he learns that mailmen aren't all bad, but I kinda like this funny way of seeing how dogs perceive mailman as the most evil kind of person. It leads to a lot of creativity. There are other examples of being kinda creative with how animals see the world. Another favorite of mine is when Leonard accidentally gives away Spot's squeaky burger toy, and this devastates Spot, mostly because this was one of the first things he ever had as a little pup. It does add the sentimentality objects can have for anyone, which this episode certainly dives into the idea that anyone can fall accustomed to that. Though it's also really funny to see Spot get all emotional over something as simple as a burger toy, intentionally so with the nice word descriptions.
We all have things like this that buy us refuge from a scary world and remind us of a time when we felt safe.
There's more than just dog-related scenarios, as the show also deals with aspects of Spot's life where he has to hide his identity better with whatever conflicts comes to be. One of the most memorable ones is when Spot has to play as his mom for parent-teachers conference. The scenario of Spot playing off more than one character is already a fun idea, but thanks to Nathan Lane's delivery, he makes all of these personas really funny.
Well, but no less super a woman than you are to raise a super son like Leonard.
Well, aren't we two just super?
D-duper.
It gets more complicated when Mrs. Ledready gets invited to dinner, which leads to Spot having to flip-flop back and forth between 3 different roles constantly, which does lead to a chaotic evening, ending with Spot getting sick from all the complications of this scheme, and also eating too many liver spots.
Now the kitchen's starting to spin. I want my mommy!
There's other scenarios that also have fun with Spot trying to hide his identity, including ones such as Spot getting an embarrassing poodle-like haircut, or how about the one where Spot accuses the cafeteria of giving him dog food? Honestly, by complete mistake, as he loves this shit.
Did you say it tasted like dog food? No, ma'am. Good. I said it is dog food.
But of course, this leads to a big controversy to why someone like Spot is insisting that it's dog food, which would reveal his identity. Though it just turns out that Leonard accidentally fed Spot the same type of cafeteria meat the school was having that day. Which, yeah, pretty humorous mistake to make there. There are other scenarios you would see in other kinds of kids shows as well. I say one that's probably most similar to SpongeBob is the episode where Spot himself becomes
Hall Monitor!
Spot gets the job as one after saving a little girl when the original Hall Monitor wasn't doing their job. Yet, much like SpongeBob, he takes his position of authority figure and goes too extreme with it. Probably more extreme, as he basically made the playground a no-fun zone, in effort of keeping the children safe. He even has a fun old-style PSA about the dangers of playground safety.
But that doesn't stop our foolish friend. I think I'll swing on the monkey bars. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. Those bars are so hot that Nicky can't even hold on to them. Ow! My hands! So little Nicky falls off the bars.
Another episode that we see in these kind of shows is the salesman episode. And in this one, Spot and Leonard want to save up some money to buy this brand new scooter. So they decide to open a lemonade stand to raise money. But luck so has it, everyone else wants to get this scooter and have their own lemonade stand. This leads to both Spot and Leonard to make their own creation to become even more popular than lemonade. And thus, the main reason I remember this episode is because of how tasty this drink they made sounds.
You've got chocolate, hazelnut, ice, a little sugar, egg white for protein, cinnamon, all blended in froth, and voila! A fresh and frozy chocolatino!
Seriously, I need to try this for myself. Or someone else try this ingredient to see if this choco drink is worth all the hype. Seriously, someone get Benji with Bobbish or someone like him to get this recipe more well known and can confirm of whether or not it's actually great. One last episode I wanted to briefly mention is another one where Spot does well at some good roleplay. There's one where he plays as this Sherlock Holmes style detective known as Inspector Ledready, where he has to try to solve the case of who broke the map. Despite display of different country made by Leslie. Leonard is framed for this, but we see as it goes on, there's a lot more to this story, and it plays out as your typical mystery where we get some good lead-ins and curveballs. I won't reveal how the mystery goes, but I think Scott's dedication to being this crime solver certainly gives it a fun watch. So with all of those episodes being talked about, is there anything I'm missing when it comes to talking about Teacher's Pet? Oh yeah, something the show does fairly often is that it does actually have a decent amount of songs to it.
That stands for Scott.
Scott, oh, we got Scott.
Yes, I'm your man. You bet I can, 'cause I've got wit, verve, and nerve, and bite, and plenty of fire.
Yeah, like every other episode, there's at least one big musical number that occurs within the episode. And you know, for what they are, they're not too bad. I wouldn't call the songs of Teacher's Pet to be any of the best TV show songs, but it's a decent standout for the series to be kind of a musical at points. I think this was to get it to be more like a Disney show, since they're more well known for musical numbers than the likes of Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, though it's still a good standout, as we don't get shows that really embraces a musical aspect. Usually if an animated series does have a musical number, it might be one of those 1 or 2 per season in most cases. It does make those episodes of those non-musical shows stand out more, yet it is also refreshing to see a show do this kind of stuff more often, and fairly well. Also, thanks to a show like this having a bit of Broadway background with someone like Nathan Lane, if it means giving him an opportunity to sing and go all out, then so be it.
Someone to lick my fur. She picks me up. I snuggle her.
So with all of that said and done for a show that has a decent amount of good episodes, you wonder, how does one end a series like this? Well, since this is what I consider to be Disney's version of SpongeBob, they decided to beat SquarePants to the punch in 2004 by making its finale a feature film.
Coming only to theaters.
Is it really you?
In the fur!
Disney's Teacher's Pet.
Now, I gotta be perfectly honest about this. I have no idea why this movie was made to begin with. This isn't a dog on this movie as stated. I do really like this show, but was there that big of a demand for a movie based on Teacher's Pet? When I think of other shows that eventually got a movie, it's usually always a show that's relatively well known. Even if the movie ended up being a box office flop, I can understand the reason behind making a film due to the popularity of the show. Outside of watching it on Toon Disney, I didn't hear anyone talk about this show, even back when I was a kid. So how the hell did this show get a theatrically released movie, no less? It's especially weird considering how other Disney shows like Darkwing Duck, Gargoyles, Kim Possible, Phineas and Ferb, and Gravity Falls, I feel are much more popular both now and even back when they came out. And they never got any sort of big screen theatrical movie. So what made Teacher's Pet so special? Was there an executive at Disney who loved the show so much that they wanted to make a movie of it? Did Gary Baseman want a film career at some point and this was his start off? Was it part of Nathan Lane's contract? Quite frankly, I have no idea, and I don't think many people were aware of its existence, as unsurprisingly, this movie did not do all that well financially at the box office.
Soft could what he says be true.
And that's putting it lightly, as Teacher's Pet on its opening weekend only made $3.5 million on a $10 million budget.
Wah, wah, wah.
Not even cracking the top 10. That's pretty bad. But hey, as I mentioned in the past, just because a film isn't financially successful doesn't make it a bad movie on its own, and vice versa. So, is Teacher's Pet the movie a good one on its own and as a series finale? Honestly, I say it's a decent, unique film. A very odd one, but one I feel is quite welcoming. My guess, Disney saw more of this being appealing as a film as a way to be like, this isn't your typical Disney fairy tale-like movie. So in other words, they were basically trying to be more like Shrek with this film as a way to be more popular. I mean, the film even opens up with a parody of Disney's Pinocchio, so it already gives that sort of vibe. Either way, this film is definitely a better Disney remake of Pinocchio than the one they came out with last year, that's for sure.
I wish I was a boy. I wish I wasn't. Ow, you're hurting me, dear blue fairy.
Of course, this only leads to them doing what else? A big scale theatrical version of the theme song.
I gotta be a boy.
It's over, just be a rover.
Gotta be a boy.
Which is honestly a cliche I love seeing in movies based on TV shows. Which, in regards to a point I made earlier about this show having musical numbers, this movie unsurprisingly went all out by being a musical. Not just the theme song, but you get a plethora of other songs featured in this movie, possibly more than the average Disney film, as a lot of these songs are very fast paced and come rapid fire, as this movie does represent the manic energy of the show by being such a fast paced movie. The highlight might be this big road trip song where they sing about all 50 states.
There's a whole bunch of world in our backyard.
An awful lot of world to see. Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas.
It gives me a very Animaniacs sort of vibe. Shortly after the introduction, the first musical number though, we get a reveal of the premise of this film, as it's the last day of school, and Mrs. Helperman has been honored to potentially receive a Teacher of the Year award in Florida, which leads Principal Strickler to give Mrs. Helperman his RV to go on this massive road trip with the entire family. There's just one little issue. As we know Strickler's vendetta against dogs, this makes it so Scott/Spot is unable to go on this trip. Though that doesn't stop Spot from ending up going, as while Leonard and his mom are on their way to Florida, Spot sees something on TV regarding a person named Dr. Ivan Frank. A crazy mad scientist becomes the main antagonist of this movie and is voiced very well by Kelsey Grammer, which, yes, he does have a song later on, and I gotta showcase this similarity again.
Now the whole world will see the genius in me, for I stand on the shoulders of giants.
What's his big scheme? Well, I'll let him explain.
Which will allow me to transform dumb animals into dumb human beings just like you.
Of course, since Spot wants to be a human being, he has a reason to go to Florida. So Spot ends up meeting up with Leonard and his mom, and he ends up convincing Leonard's mom to go on the trip by disguising himself as Scott instead. Seems simple enough until he has to play as all of the Lead Ready family so he can go on this trip to convince Leonard's mom. This actually leads to one of the funniest parts of the movie, of him just constantly swapping these characters just to convince this woman.
Riding your highly fine nephew to fair Florida.
Well, of course I'll take him. I've been planning to take him all along.
And you couldn't have just said that to the lady in the flowery dress?
Meanwhile, during all of this, Pretty Boy and Mr. Jolly find out more about Ivan Frank, as apparently his experiments on animals turning into humans are known to have gone wrong and created mutants. See, this is why you shouldn't trust a Florida man to do this kind of stuff, which inevitably leads Pretty Boy and Mr. Jolly to go on this road trip as well, as they're the only other characters aside from the main three that make an impact regarding this movie's plot. This film is really only focused on the main characters of the show, as other prominent characters are taking a back seat. Strickler only appears in the beginning, Leslie only has one line in the whole film, Ian does appear a few times being Frank's nephew, but he doesn't really contribute that much to the plot. Not a bad thing, as I mentioned, the side characters of Teacher's Pet weren't necessarily the strongest element of that show, so nice that they kept it focused to what the show was mainly about. Eventually, Spot and Leonard do make it to Dr. Frank's laboratory, and after a big musical number, he does grant Spot his long-desired wish. And how does that turn out? Well, it seems as dreams do come true, as Dr. Ivan Frank had successfully granted Spot's wish of becoming a real human child. A man-child, in fact.
I'm a really big boy.
Yeah, something that wasn't taken into consideration for Spot's transition to become a real boy was dog years in terms of how old Spot actually is. So instead of becoming a real boy, he becomes a man based on the fact that in dog years, he's much older than his initial age. Though now, Spot has to live the life as a man, and this leads him and Leonard to find a way to be able to do the adult things Spot needs to do. It leads to them finding a bunch of lost cats and getting rewarded.
I can't give you $100.
But that's okay, Leonard. A good deed is its own reward.
No, you brought back 5 dogs, so I'm giving you $500.
I do love how optimistic this film is by thinking that $500 is a lot of money, especially in today's economy. Eventually, the new Scott, who instead of Lead Ready, decided to go with the name Manly Man. Very clever. Meets up with Leonard's mom, and leads to something I wanted to bring up that was an interesting observation I had with this movie. See, a major conflict that occurs in this film is that Leonard wants to spend the summer being with Spot as his dog, which of course, Spot doesn't want that. He wants to live life as a real boy, which leads me to wonder, is Leonard a selfish prick for wanting Spot not to live the life he wants and instead wants him to keep being a dog? I wondered this. With identity and letting people be who they want to be is a big talking point nowadays, especially in areas like the LGBT community. Is Leonard a bigot for not being okay with Spot's decision of wanting to become someone different than who he currently is? As spoiler alert, the movie does end up leading to Spot staying as a dog, and his whole thing is being appreciative of being the person he was born as. A typical be happy with what you have, but also a little odd message when a lot of people have changed their own identity in a way that made their life for the better, being more comfortable with themselves. So, is it bad that they didn't end up leaving Spot to be a human for the rest of his life? Well, to the film's credit, it does make it more Spot's decision in terms of wanting to be a dog again. There were a lot of things that he did love as a dog, and that friendship bond he had with Leonard was really important to him, being the main reason for having the good life he has. So I say this is done with decent taste. Plus, Spot did legit try out the life he was as a human, and it turned out it wasn't all that cracked up to be for him. So ultimately, this is more his decision, which is good. That, and also, there is one thing that honestly makes this film a little more awkward when you really think about it. As when meeting Mrs. Leadready, Spot develops something of a crush on her. And since he's roughly closer to her age, he gets this strange idea in his head.
I won't be sleeping at the bottom bunk anymore, but I promise I'll tuck you in and tell you a bedtime story before I settle in to watch the 9 o'clock news with Mary Lou.
Spot, what are you doing?
Who?
You know, your mom.
Okay, I don't think I can get behind this. Really think about it. It's already awkward enough that Leonard has to have his own dog turn into a human in front of his own eyes. But now, Spot wants to make things more awkward for his kid because he wants to stay human so he can get with his owner's mother just so he can do the simple act of... Don't lie to yourself. You would be very uncomfortable with the idea of your own dog wanting to date your mom or any parental figure in that case. Understandably so. Leonard gets pissed about Scott's scheme, and it leads to a typical moment of them splitting up. But of course, their friendship is so strong, they don't stay mad at each other as Scott realizes the errors of his ways. He figures he has it good as a dog with Leonard, and doesn't want to tarnish his friendship even further. This includes realizing that it's kind of fucked up that he wants to date his owner's mom. Seriously, Spot seeks some help. Leonard, on the other hand, gets this rather odd idea of his own to have Dr. Ivan Frank transform him into a dog so he can be Scott's best friend in the way that Spot was his own best friend. Yeah, this movie is very weird in a lot of ways. It does lead to a pretty fun finale in the lab where Spot, Mr. Jolly, and Pretty Boy all try to save Leonard. We even get a fun moment where we get to see Pretty Boy and Mr. Jolly's human form.
You are one ugly man.
Well, I've been under a little stress lately.
Then, in a turn of events, Spot sacrifices himself to save Leonard.
Oh, Scott.
Of course he survives it, while Dr. Ivan Frank gets turned into a mouse and is presumably bored by Mr. Jolly. Though I will say, one other issue I have with this movie is the ending. Not that it's bad or anything, the characters do end up having a satisfying conclusion, not just for the film, but probably for the series in general. But as soon as Spot comes back and the villain is defeated, the film just kinda ends there. There's a reprise of Gotta Be a Boy as the finale, and rather than any sort of following action after the climax, it's just this finale song, and that's it. There's no sudden revelation, no reveal of Mrs. Ledready being aware of Spot's situation. It's just climax and then cuts straight to the ending, which is odd. But at the same time, it still works as a satisfying conclusion for the show. Like I said, the characters do end up being satisfied with their conclusion, with Leonard and Spot still being the best of friends. And as far as the Teacher's Pet movie go, it's still a very unique animated film from Disney. Despite its flaws, rush ending, and very odd character choices, its expressive animation, fun-filled musical numbers, and likable characters make this a very enjoyable film that I honestly kind of miss having around. Like a big screen 2D animated film that's not 100% the Disney style, we rarely get that anymore. And it was a good attempt, even if I was maybe one of the only 5 people who saw this in theaters. Sure, I wouldn't have picked Teacher's Pet to be a theatrical movie either, but for what essentially is the series finale of this show, they did a good job with what they accomplished as a way to end the series like this, discussing the importance of friendship. As Scott and Leonard said,
Friend needs a friend, a road needs a bend, a film needs an end.
and so does a video, which time to wrap up my final thoughts on Teacher's Pet as a whole. This is still a standout series for Disney, just for how unique it is compared to so many cartoons at that time. Sure, there are shows that are immensely better from Disney Animation, and it's still weird that Teacher's Pet got a movie of all things before so many other shows. Yet, I'm still glad something like this exists. It's a show that really embellishes in being this expressive cartoon that has a lot of personality thanks to the talent involved. Spot/Scott Ledready makes this show worth watching alone. And if you still haven't watched this show, don't be afraid to give it a chance. It's on Disney Plus, as I stated, and even despite having a movie, it doesn't really get talked about in the grand scheme of Disney shows. Hopefully this video brought some attention to this show, much like how I wanted my Pepper Ann video to bring attention to a series I love. Granted, this is nowhere near as good as Pepper Ann, but I'm still very happy that I ended up growing up with something as charming and fun as something like a show about a dog who wants to go to school. It's weird, but it has an energy that you don't really see in major shows like this, that give it that unique edge that makes it so memorable to me. It's the kind of show that makes you absolutely proud to be a dog lover for having some of the most insightful and expressive canine characters to have ever appeared on television. So take that for what it's worth.
Ah, boy,